I've been a taxi driver for years now, navigating the streets of this old town that's steeped in history and mystery. It's a place where every corner whispers secrets of the past, and where the shadows seem to dance with a life of their own. But nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited me one fateful night, a horror that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. Let me set the scene for you. The town I call home is nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forests that seem to stretch on forever. The streets are lined with Victorian-era buildings, their once grand facades now weathered and worn with age. There's an eerie beauty to the place, a sense of melancholy that hangs heavy in the air. As for me, I'm just a regular guy trying to make ends meet. Driving a taxi might not be the most glamorous job, but it puts food on the table and keeps a roof over my head. Most nights are uneventful, just me and the hum of the engine as I ferry passengers from one destination to another. But on this particular night, I would come face to face with something beyond my wildest nightmares. It started like any other shift. I was cruising down the deserted streets, the only sound the soft patter of rain on the windshield. The town seemed to be asleep, its inhabitants tucked away in their homes, safe and sound. But as I turned a corner onto a narrow, winding road that led into the heart of the forest, I felt a chill run down my spine. The forest loomed on either side of the road, the trees reaching up towards the sky like gnarled fingers. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from my headlights, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, her pale face illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. She looked to be in her late teens, with long dark hair that hung in tangled knots around her shoulders. She was dressed in a tattered white gown that billowed in the wind, and her eyes were wide with fear. Without thinking, I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" I called out to her, my voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. She didn't respond, just stood there staring at me with those haunted eyes. I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach, a sense of unease creeping over me like a shadow. But before I could say anything else, she climbed into the back seat of the taxi and slammed the door shut behind her. I turned around to get a better look at her, but she was gone. The back seat was empty, the only evidence of her presence, the faint smell of decay that lingered in the air. I shook my head in disbelief, chalking it up to my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I shifted the car into drive and pressed down on the gas pedal, eager to put some distance between myself and whatever had just happened. But as I navigated the winding road through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting between the trees. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, a trick of the light, but the rational part of my brain knew better. There was something out there, something watching us, and it was getting closer with every passing moment. I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the girl sitting there, staring back at me. But the back seat remained empty, a void of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. I could feel her presence though, a cold chill that permeated the air and sent shivers down my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white with fear, I wanted nothing more than to get out of there, to leave this cursed forest behind and never look back. But no matter how fast I drove, it felt like we were going in circles, trapped in a never-ending maze of trees and shadows. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around us, echoing through the darkness like a death knell. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to keep control of the car. I glanced into the rearview mirror one last time, and that's when I saw her. The girl was sitting in the back seat, her eyes empty and soulless as she stared back at me. But it wasn't just her anymore. There were others with her, shadowy figures that writhed and twisted in the darkness, their faces contorted in agony. I tried to scream, to tear my eyes away from the horrifying sight before me, but it was no use. I was paralyzed with fear, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. And as the growling grew louder and the shadows closed in around us, I knew that this was only the beginning of our descent into madness. In the end, I'm not sure what happened. One moment we were surrounded by darkness, the next we were bathed in blinding light. I blinked and found myself sitting in my taxi on the side of the road, the forest stretching out before me like a silent sentinel. I stumbled out of the car, my legs trembling beneath me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But there were no answers, only questions that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Who was the girl? What were those shadowy figures? And most importantly, what did they want from me? I may never know the answers to those questions, but one thing's for certain. I'll never look at this town the same way again. Behind its picturesque facade lies a darkness that defies explanation, a horror that lurks in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. As for me, I've hung up my keys for good. I'll never set foot in that taxi again, never venture into those haunted woods where the spirits of the past still linger. Some things are better left undisturbed, and I for one have no desire to tempt fate any longer. So if you ever find yourself in this town, beware, for you never know what horrors await you in the dead of night, or what nightmares lurk just beyond the edge of the forest. And if you ever see a taxi cruising down the deserted streets, with its driver's eyes wide with fear, do yourself a favor and keep walking. Some rides are better left unclaimed. In the sprawling city of Chicago, nestled amidst its bustling streets and towering skyscrapers, lies a neighborhood shrouded in mystery and darkness. Englewood, notorious for its high crime rates and whispered tales of the supernatural, is a place where the bravest tread cautiously. I, a humble taxi driver named Michael, found myself navigating its shadowy alleys and deserted roads on one fateful night. Little did I know that journey would plunge me into a harrowing nightmare beyond my wildest imagination. My shift had begun like any other, the neon lights of downtown Chicago flickering as the city came alive with the buzz of nightlife. Englewood, however, was a different world altogether. Its streets were eerily quiet, punctuated only by the occasional siren in the distance. As I cruised through its labyrinthine roads, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes followed my every move. The call came in just past midnight, a nondescript voice requesting a ride to an address deep within Englewood. Despite my reservations, the promise of a hefty fare outweighed my unease. Little did I know that decision would seal my fate. Pulling up to the designated address, I was met with a sight that sent shivers down my spine. The house loomed ominously in the darkness, its windows boarded up like eyes shut tight against the horrors of the night. As I waited, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman cloaked in darkness, her features obscured by the veil of night. She slid into the back seat without a word, her presence sending a chill through the air. Her destination was vague, a series of winding streets that seemed to lead nowhere. With a sense of trepidation, I set off into the heart of Englewood, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic beat of my own heart. As we delved deeper into the heart of darkness, a sense of foreboding washed over me like a tidal wave. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more dilapidated, until it felt as though we had entered another realm entirely. It was then that I noticed something unsettling. The woman in the back seat had yet to utter a single word, her silence a palpable presence that hung heavy in the air. My nerves frayed with each passing moment, my grip on reality slipping like sand through my fingers. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, we reached our destination, a desolate alleyway shrouded in darkness. With a sense of dread clawing at my chest, I brought the taxi to a halt, the headlights casting long shadows that danced against the walls. The woman in the back seat made no move to exit, her eyes fixated on something beyond my line of sight. And then, with a voice as cold as ice, she spoke. "You've brought me to the right place, driver," she said, her words dripping with malice. "But there is one final task you must complete." My blood ran cold as she handed me a small tarnished key, an artifact from a bygone era. With trembling hands, I accepted it, the weight of its significance pressing down upon me like a leaden cloak. With a sense of urgency born of sheer terror, I stumbled out of the taxi and into the darkness, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, the woman's laughter echoed like a haunting melody, driving me forward with a desperate need to escape. As I ran, the world around me seemed to warp and shift, reality bending to the whims of some unseen force. It was as though Englewood itself had come alive, its streets twisting and turning like the labyrinth of a madman's mind. And then, just when I feared I could run no longer, I saw it, a glimmer of light in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed forward, my lungs burning with exertion as I raced towards freedom. I emerged from the darkness like a man possessed, the cold night air biting at my skin as I stumbled into the safety of the city streets. Behind me, Englewood lay silent and still, its secrets hidden once more beneath a veil of darkness. As I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath, I knew that I would never forget the horrors I had witnessed that night. The woman, the key, the sense of impending doom, they would haunt me for the rest of my days. A grim reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of reality. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was one thing I knew for certain. I had survived. And though the memory of that night would forever linger in the darkest corners of my mind, I would emerge stronger for having faced the abyss and lived to tell the tale. The tale of my nightmarish journey through the heart of Englewood is one that few would believe, and fewer still would dare to repeat. But as I sit here now, penning these words in the safety of daylight, I know that the truth of that fateful night cannot be denied. For in the darkest corners of the world, where reality blurs and nightmares come to life, There are those who walk in shadow, their presence a harbinger of doom. And though I may never fully understand the horrors I witnessed that night, I take solace in the knowledge that I am not alone, that somewhere out there, others have faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale. But for now, I must leave this tale to the annals of history, a warning to those who would dare to venture where angels fear to tread. For in the end, the true horror lies not in the darkness itself, but in the knowledge that it waits, patient and hungry, for its next unwitting victim. As a taxi driver in a bustling city, I've seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I picked up a passenger whose presence seemed to emanate an aura of dread. This is the story of that fateful ride, a journey that plunged me into the depths of horror and tested the limits of my sanity. It was a typical Friday night in the city, with the streets teeming with people heading to bars, clubs, and late-night events. I was parked outside a popular nightclub, waiting for my next fare. The area was notorious for its vibrant nightlife, but also for its dark history. Legends whispered of unsolved mysteries and paranormal occurrences that plagued the streets after dark. I was about to call it a night when a figure emerged from the shadows and flagged me down. As he approached, I could see that he was dressed in a long, dark coat that seemed to swallow the light around him. His face was obscured by the shadows of his hood, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Where to?" I asked, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. "The old, abandoned hospital," he replied in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "And make it quick." I hesitated for a moment, the stories of the abandoned hospital flooding my mind. It was said to be haunted, the site of numerous tragedies and untold horrors, but the promise of a hefty fare outweighed my fears, and I reluctantly agreed to take him there. As we drove through the deserted streets, a sense of unease settled over me like a thick fog. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the taxi's suspension. I stole glances at my passenger in the rearview mirror, but he remained unnervingly still, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. As we approached the abandoned hospital, a sense of dread washed over me like a tidal wave. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. We pulled up to the entrance, and my passenger instructed me to wait for him. I watched as he disappeared into the depths of the building, his figure swallowed by the darkness. Minutes stretched into hours, and still he did not return. A feeling of unease gnawed at my insides, and I considered driving away and leaving him behind. But something held me back, a sense of morbid curiosity mingled with fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he emerged from the shadows, a look of triumph on his face. He climbed back into the taxi, his movements jerky and erratic. "Take me home," he commanded, his voice cold and commanding. I did as he asked, my mind racing with questions and fears. What had he been doing in that abandoned hospital? And why did he seem so pleased with himself? As we drove through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air seemed to grow colder with each passing moment, and the darkness outside pressed in on us like a living thing. Suddenly, without warning, the taxi's engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the middle of the road. I tried to restart it, but the ignition refused to catch. Panic rose in my throat like bile as I realized that we were completely at the mercy of whatever malevolent force had taken hold of us. My passenger laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Do you know what this place is?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. I shook my head, too terrified to speak. "This is where they experimented on the patients," he continued, his eyes glinting with madness. "They thought they could play God, but they only succeeded in unleashing something far worse." Before I could react, the doors of the taxi burst open, and a wave of darkness flooded in, engulfing us both. I screamed as tendrils of shadow wrapped themselves around me, dragging me into the abyss. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself lying on the side of the road, my taxi nowhere to be seen. The events of that night seemed like a distant nightmare, but the terror that gripped me was all too real. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something evil lurks in the shadows, waiting to drag unsuspecting souls into its clutches. And I know that I will never be able to escape the horror of that fateful ride, the night I came face to face with the darkness that lies within us all